The year was 1812, and winter had seized the English countryside with an iron hand. Snow lay thick upon the hedgerows, muffling the world in a solemn quiet. Beyond the misted hills stood Ashcroft Manor, a proud house fallen to shadow. Once the seat of laughter and gentle company, it now echoed only with the clipped voices of its mistress and her ambitious daughters. Within its frostbitten walls lived Lady Evelina Ashcroft, daughter of the late Earl, now little more than a ghost in her own home. 6 years had passed since her father's death, and in that time she had learned the art of silence, how to move without sound, how to bear cruelty without a flinch, and how to endure the slow erosion of her name. Each dawn found her in the servants' quarters, folding linen that once bore her family crest, her delicate hands reddened by the chill. The servants pitied her, but pity was dangerous in that house. Lady Beatrice Ashcroft, her stepmother, ruled through fear wrapped in charm. Her daughters, Clara and Josephine, were reflections of her vanity, beautiful, brittle, and ever conscious of the social gaze. They delighted in reminding Evelina that she had no dowry, no guardianship, and no place at their table. To them, she was a remnant, a living embarrassment to be hidden from the eyes of guests who might recall the true heiress of Ashcroft. That December, the manor stirred with unusual energy. A Christmas ball was to be held, an evening of candles, carols, and courtship arranged for the twins' 27th year. Lady Beatrice's ambition burned as fiercely as the hearth she ordered kept alight in every room. The invitations had been sent across the county. The name Ashcroft would once again glitter among nobility, even if the cost was deceit. Evelina was given no dress, no invitation. She was to serve wine, polish silver, and remain unseen. "You may stand in the corner, child," Lady Beatrice said with a smile that cut like glass. "Your plainness will make my daughters shine all the brighter." The night of the ball arrived beneath a canopy of falling snow. Lanterns lined the drive as carriages rolled in, wheels crunching over ice. Music spilled from the great hall, violins, laughter, and the rustle of silk gowns. Evelina stood by the doorway, clad in a servant's apron, her hair bound back with a simple ribbon. She watched the guests sweep past her, oblivious to the tremor in her hands. How strange, she thought, that this house could gleam so brightly while her heart remained cloaked in winter. Inside, Clara and Josephine were radiant in gowns of rose and ivory, each angling toward whichever gentleman promised the greatest title. Their mother hovered like a falcon, assessing smiles and fortunes. Evelina moved among them unnoticed, pouring wine, fetching shawls, and offering quiet curtsies to people who once greeted her as lady. She carried herself with a grace that no humiliation could erase, but every word spoken in that hall pressed against her like ice. She heard one matron whisper, "How curious, there's a girl in service who bears the Earl's eyes." Another laughed softly, "Impossible. The Earl's daughter died of shame years ago." When Clara intentionally brushed against her, spilling red wine down Evelina's sleeve, the room erupted in soft, scandalized murmurs. "How clumsy of you," Clara said sweetly, loud enough for all to hear. "One must have training to handle crystal." Evelina bowed her head, murmuring an apology though none was owed. Lady Beatrice's voice followed, syrupy and cruel. "Do take care, my dear. Some stains never wash out." Laughter rippled like frost across her skin. She turned away before tears could fall, retreating through the back corridor toward the one refuge left to her, the portrait room. Dust cloaked the forgotten chamber like a shroud. Curtains hung heavy, their edges moth-eaten, and beneath them stood the towering portrait of her father, the late Earl of Ashcroft, his painted eyes calm and knowing. Evelina lit a single candle and set it before the frame. "You would not know me now, father," she whispered. "They have taken everything you left me, even my name." Her breath trembled as the flame wavered, "But I will keep what they cannot touch." She pressed her hand to her heart. "My dignity, at least, is mine." A sudden gust rattled the windows, scattering ash from the unused hearth. Beyond the glass, snow swirled thickly, erasing the world beyond the gates. She drew her shawl close and stood still, the candlelight gilding her features, the same golden brown hair her father once praised, the same quiet strength in her eyes. The sound of music reached her faintly through the walls, like a memory she could not return to. For a long moment, she allowed herself to imagine that she might yet dance, that someone might see her not as a servant or shadow, but as she truly was. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. She extinguished the candle and slipped behind the curtain, heart pounding. Two maids entered, gossiping in hushed tones. "Did you hear?" one said. "A carriage has been caught in the storm. A nobleman seeks shelter here. Lady Beatrice herself has gone to receive him." The other gasped. "A duke, they say, from Wexford, returned from abroad." Their voices faded as they left, leaving Evelina alone once more with the silence and the storm. She lingered by the window, peering into the whiteness. Somewhere out there, a stranger braved the snow, while she remained trapped in a gilded cage. A flicker of envy stirred within her, followed swiftly by shame. Freedom, after all, was not meant for women like her. She turned back to the portrait, whispering, "Perhaps next Christmas I shall find the courage to leave this place." In the great hall, laughter soared anew. The guests toasted Lady Beatrice's charm and the twins' beauty, unaware that their glittering facade stood upon a foundation of deceit. Upstairs, Evelina prepared the spare chambers for the unexpected guest, her movements precise, her thoughts distant. She laid out fresh linen, stoked the fire, and placed a candle on the bedside table. When all was ready, she paused at the doorway, her gaze drawn once more to the falling snow beyond the window. She could not know that in that very storm rode the man who would alter the course of her life. The wind howled through the chimney, and a strange stillness followed, as if the house itself held its breath. Evelina drew the curtain shut and whispered a prayer for the unknown traveler. Somewhere in her chest, long-buried hope stirred like the faintest ember. Outside, the sound of hooves approached, slow, uncertain, yet drawing nearer. By midnight, the ball had dwindled to embers and exhausted waltzes. The guests retired, the music faded, and the manor sank into uneasy slumber. Evelina remained awake in her small attic room, the faint hum of the storm keeping her company. She stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that formed a crooked star. Below, she heard doors open, hurried footsteps, the echo of a voice she did not recognize. Then silence again, deep and complete. In that silence, she closed her eyes and whispered to the dark, "Let tomorrow be different." Beyond the frozen fields, the Duke of Wexford's carriage pulled through the gates, its lamps flickering like twin stars, swallowed by snow. And within the sleeping house, the girl who had forgotten how to dream turned over in her narrow bed, unaware that fate had finally found its way through the storm. The following morning dawned pale and quiet, the storm having left the world glazed in white. Ashcroft Manor seemed to glitter in deceitful serenity, its chimneys trailing ribbons of smoke into the cold sky. Inside, Lady Beatrice's household bustled with nervous energy. The Duke of Wexford had arrived under most romantic circumstances, a carriage rescued from a snowbank, a nobleman forced into the warmth of an unfamiliar hearth. To Lady Beatrice, it was Providence disguised as misfortune. To Evelina, it was little more than another burden to bear, for she had been ordered to attend to the guest's comfort, unseen and unthanked as always. The Duke himself was spoken of with the hushed reverence reserved for men of fortune and lineage. Alexander Hawthorne, soldier, heir, and most dangerously, unmarried, had returned from the continent carrying both title and reputation. The servants whispered that he had lost comrades in the Peninsular War, and that his eyes held the shadow of things best left unspoken. Yet when Evelina saw him that first morning, standing by the window of the drawing-room with the snowlight casting silver across his dark hair, he appeared less a figure of tragedy and more of calm command. His voice, when he spoke, was low, measured, and touched with warmth that startled her. "You are the lady of the house?" he asked when she curtsied. "No, your grace," she replied softly, eyes lowered. "Merely one who serves within it." Something in her tone, neither resentment nor servility, caught his attention. "Merely," he repeated, as though testing the word upon his tongue. "I have yet to meet a mere woman." Before she could answer, Lady Beatrice swept in, trailing scent and silk, her smile wide enough to conceal every lie she lived. The day unfolded in rehearsed grace. Lady Beatrice's daughters fluttered about the Duke, their laughter practiced, their charm as brittle as spun glass. They offered him songs, embroidery, and the warmth of conversation that circled endlessly around his estates and fortune. He endured it all with polite detachment, answering just enough to satisfy civility. Yet, each time Evelina entered the room, carrying tea, tending the fire, his gaze followed her, quiet and searching. She felt it upon her like sunlight through a shutter, hesitant but unyielding. Lady Beatrice noticed, of course. Her smile tightened, and beneath her breath, she hissed orders to keep the girl out of sight. But fate, indifferent to schemes, had its own rhythm. That evening, as the guests gathered in the music room, the Duke was persuaded to stay another night. The storm had thickened once more, and his horses were unfit for travel. Clara and Josephine competed to display their talents before him. One sang sweetly, though off-key. The other played the pianoforte with showy imprecision. The Duke listened with kind patience until, midway through Josephine's performance, a string snapped with a sharp twang, silencing the room. Lady Beatrice, mortified, turned to Evelina, who stood near the doorway arranging candles. "You once played, did you not?" she said, her tone deceptively light. "Perhaps our guest will pardon a humble effort from one of our older servants." The cruelty was masked in civility, the audience too polite to question it. Evelina's throat tightened, yet she obeyed, crossing to the pianoforte with quiet composure. Her fingers, though stiff from years of neglect, found the keys as though greeting an old friend. What began as hesitation became melody, soft, mournful, and strangely alive. The room fell still. The Duke's expression altered from polite interest to something deeper, as if he recognized her grief in the music's language. When the final note faded, no one spoke. Evelina rose and curtsied silently, retreating toward the shadows. Lady Beatrice laughed too loudly, breaking the spell. "Charming," she said, her voice brittle. "A servant with such a gift, how quaint." Yet the Duke's gaze lingered, his thoughts unreadable. Later, when the company dispersed, Evelina returned to the music room to extinguish the candles. Upon the pianoforte lay a small object she had not placed there, a silver locket, delicately engraved with the crest of Wexford. Inside, on one side, rested a tiny pressed violet. On the other, an empty space where a portrait might have been. She closed it carefully, unsure whether to treasure or return it, and pressed it briefly to her heart before tucking it away. By morning, the locket's discovery had become the talk of the servants' hall. Clara claimed she had seen Evelina holding something glittering. Josephine swore she had glimpsed a secret exchange. Gossip, once kindled, spread like fire. Lady Beatrice summoned Evelina to the drawing room, where the Duke sat reading by the hearth. "Your Grace," Beatrice began with saccharine concern, "it grieves me to say that one of my maids has behaved most improperly. A trinket of yours was found in her possession." She gestured sharply to Evelina. "She is deceitful, I fear. Pretty masks hide ugly ambitions." Evelina stood pale and silent, the locket resting in her trembling hand. The Duke looked up slowly, his blue eyes steady. "And who told you she stole it?" he asked. Beatrice blinked, caught off guard. "Why, it is plain, is it not?" "Plain," he echoed softly. "I find nothing plain about her honesty." A murmur rippled through the room. The Duke rose, walking toward Evelina until the firelight pooled around them both. "You found this where?" he asked gently. "Upon the pianoforte, Your Grace," she whispered. "I meant to return it." "Then return it now." She did, placing it in his palm with downcast eyes. He studied her for a moment before turning to Lady Beatrice. "There is no impropriety, madam, save the insult of your accusation." His words, though spoken evenly, carried the weight of final judgment. Lady Beatrice's composure faltered. "You mistake my concern, my lord," she stammered. "I merely protect your daughter's vanity." His interruption was soft but lethal. "Let us hope they never need such defense." The silence that followed was absolute. When he departed the room, Evelina's heart pounded so fiercely she thought the sound might betray her. She had expected condemnation, yet received defense. For the first time in years, Someone had spoken her name, without cruelty. That evening, she sat alone in the attic, replaying his words in her mind. I find nothing plain about her honesty. It was a kindness so simple. It felt like light after a long winter. Below stairs, Lady Beatrice seethed, her pride wounded. She warned her daughters to keep the Duke entertained, to leave no opportunity for him to notice the servant girl again. But desire once awakened is not easily subdued. The following night, as snow thickened against the windows, the Duke requested music once more. "If the young lady who played before might oblige us," he said, his tone courteous but firm. Lady Beatrice forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "She is unwell, your grace," she lied. "Perhaps another evening." The Duke inclined his head, concealing his disappointment. "A pity," he murmured. "Few play with such truth." Later, Evelina passed by the library and found the door ajar. Within, the Duke stood by the fire, turning the silver locket over in his hand. He looked up and saw her reflection in the glass. "I believe, Miss Ashcroft," he said quietly, "that music reveals more of a soul than lineage ever could." Her breath caught. He had used her name. She hesitated, unsure whether to curtsy or flee. "You must not call me that," she whispered. "They would not like it." His voice softened further. "Then let us keep it between us, as a kindness the world need not see." Outside, the storm deepened, winds whispering against the panes. The distance between them seemed both perilous and precious. A fragile thread stretched across the gulf of class and convention. She lowered her gaze, heart unsteady. "Good night, your grace," she murmured. "Good night, Miss Ashcroft," he replied, the faintest smile touching his lips. When she had gone, he placed the locket upon the mantel and whispered to the empty room, "If truth has a voice, I have heard it." And beyond the frozen windows, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, and full of promise. The following day dawned beneath a muted sky, the world wrapped in fog that clung to the windows like breath upon glass. The household stirred with the unease that follows scandal, for whispers still lingered from the previous evening. Lady Beatrice had not forgiven the humiliation of being corrected before her guest. Her smile at breakfast was as polished as ever, yet her gaze toward Evelina burned with concealed malice. The Duke, though outwardly composed, seemed less at ease among them. He spoke politely, but his eyes wandered often, searching, waiting, for the quiet girl who kept slipping from sight. Evelina kept to the lower halls, mindful of her stepmother's scrutiny. The memory of the Duke's defense both comforted and troubled her. It was a dangerous kindness, one that might cost her dearly if misread. Yet beneath her caution stirred a warmth she could neither suppress nor name. That evening, when the household gathered for supper, Lady Beatrice announced with feigned regret that her guests' horses were unfit to travel until the snow relented. "We must consider it Providence," she said sweetly. "After all, one so distinguished graces our home but rarely." The Duke inclined his head but did not smile. He was weary of artifice. He longed for sincerity, and he knew instinctively where it dwelled. Later, when the company dispersed to their chambers, he wandered the corridors, drawn by a faint scent of lilac and the glow of candlelight spilling from an open door. The room beyond was the conservatory, long neglected, its glass panes filmed with frost. Among the shadows moved Evelina, her shawl drawn tight, tending the wilted remains of a rosebush. She startled when she turned and saw him there. "Forgive me," he said softly, stepping inside. "I had not meant to intrude." She curtsied. "This place is seldom visited, your grace. I come here only to remember what once was." He looked around, the crumbling stone urns, the dead vines curling like old memories, and understood. "Your father's hand was in this," he murmured. "He loved these roses," she said quietly. "He said even in decay there is dignity." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rattled against the glass, scattering flakes across the panes. He studied her in the dim light, seeing not a servant, but the remnant of gentility forced into humility. "Lady Evelina," he said deliberately, "why do you bear such cruelty in silence?" She froze, the sound of her name falling like a secret too fragile for the air. "Because," she whispered, Silence is safer than truth. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. And yet truth, once spoken, may set you free. Her eyes lifted to his, luminous with something between fear and hope. Freedom is a luxury, your grace. Women like me are taught to endure, not to change our fate. He hesitated before speaking again. I have seen courage in battle, he said, but none as quiet as yours. She turned away, trembling. You mistake endurance for bravery. No, he replied gently. Endurance is the truest kind. He reached for a fallen rose petal, placing it upon the sill between them. If the world will not see you, Lady Evelina, he said, I shall. Her breath caught. His words were both benediction and promise. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this unexpected tenderness was real. But the memory of years spent invisible held her back. You should not speak so, she murmured. It will bring you nothing but trouble. Then let trouble come, he answered, his tone quiet but unyielding. The moment hung suspended, delicate as frost. She could not recall the last time anyone had spoken her name, without disdain. He did not reach for her hand, though the distance between them seemed to hum with unspoken longing. Instead, he bowed slightly, as though to a lady of rank. Good night, Lady Evelina, he said. May the roses bloom again for you. When he left, the air seemed emptier for his absence. She pressed a hand to her chest, uncertain whether she feared or cherished what had begun. But unseen eyes had witnessed their exchange. A young maid, loyal to Lady Beatrice, had lingered by the doorway, curiosity giving way to alarm. By morning, the tale was twisted and carried on hushed tongues. The Duke alone with the servant girl, words exchanged, impropriety implied. Lady Beatrice seized upon it with venomous precision. So this is how she repays my charity, she said to her daughters. We shall remind her of her station. That afternoon, Evelina was summoned to the study. A sealed letter lay upon the desk, its wax unbroken. A message from His Grace. Lady Beatrice declared coldly, He departs this very night. It seems your company has wearied him. Evelina's heart faltered. That cannot be, she whispered. He would not leave without farewell. Lady Beatrice's smile deepened. Men of worth do not bid farewell to their amusements. She pressed the letter into Evelina's hands. He was kind enough to leave instructions for your removal. You will go before dusk. When Evelina reached her small room, tears blurred the ink as she read the words, formal, distant, cruel in their detachment. I must leave at once. Our acquaintance, though brief, should end here. I wish you every happiness life may afford. She folded the letter with trembling fingers. It was his hand, his seal, yet the tone felt foreign cold. Still, she had no reason to doubt what stood before her. Hope, once fragile, now shattered. She packed the few belongings she owned, a shawl, a book of psalms, and the pressed violet she had hidden from the locket. By sunset, she slipped from the servants' gate into the swirling snow, her figure vanishing into the white silence. When the Duke descended later that evening, he found the household subdued. Lady Beatrice greeted him with exaggerated politeness. We are most grateful for your stay, your grace, she said. Ashcroft will always remember your kindness. He inclined his head. And Miss Evelina? He asked casually. I had hoped to thank her for her assistance. Beatrice's expression flickered before she replied. She left our service. I deemed her presence unnecessary. Something in her tone pierced him. Left, he repeated, without word to me. Indeed, some spirits are not suited to discipline. He studied her face, reading what she sought to conceal, and his jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode from the room. Outside, the snow was falling thick and relentless, the same storm that had once brought him there now threatening to erase every trace of her. He ordered his horse, saddled despite protest. The wind bit at his face, but he pressed on, following the faint trail of footprints leading toward the woods. Evelina, he called into the storm. No answer came but the howl of wind through branches. Still he rode, driven by a force he scarcely understood. Somewhere in that endless white, the girl who had endured in silence was alone again, her name stolen, her heart betrayed by deceit not her own. And though he did not yet see her, he knew with fierce certainty that he would. The storm had not relented through the night, and by morning the countryside lay buried beneath a veil of white. The Duke's horse stumbled through the drifts, exhausted, yet he urged it forward, his heart pounding with dread and determination. Every mile stretched into eternity, and still no sign of her. The image of Evelina's face, pale and tear-streaked beneath the flickering candlelight, haunted him with every gust of wind. He cursed himself for not having seen through Lady Beatrice's deceit sooner. He should have known that venom hides best behind courtesy. Somewhere within that endless white, Evelina walked alone, her fragile body no match for the merciless cold. By noon, his search brought him to a small chapel standing at the edge of the forest, its windows frosted over, its bell long silent. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, thin but steady. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the snow, and pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the scent of melted wax and pine met him. A lone figure knelt before the altar, wrapped in a threadbare cloak. Her hair, dark and unbound, caught the faint light like threads of sorrow. "Evelina," he breathed, and she turned, disbelief flashing in her eyes before tears welled up anew. "You should not have come," she whispered, her voice trembling from cold and grief. There was nothing left to say. He crossed the small space between them and took her hands, icy, fragile, trembling. "Then let me say what should have been said," he answered. "That letter you received, it was not mine. Every word was a lie." She shook her head, the ache of betrayal still too raw. "It bore your seal." "A seal can be stolen," he said bitterly. "A conscience cannot. I searched for you because I cannot breathe knowing you think me capable of cruelty." She withdrew her hands, retreating a step, uncertainty flickering in her expression. "Why?" she asked, the single word heavy with disbelief. "Why would you risk your name, your comfort, your place in society for me?" He looked at her as though she were the only truth that existed. "Because since the moment I saw you, I have thought of nothing else. Because in a house full of deception, you alone were real." His voice softened. "And because I would rather be condemned for honesty than praised for silence." Her eyes filled with tears. "You cannot mean it," she said, almost pleading. "You are a duke and you are the woman I would have chosen, had choice ever been mine." He interrupted. "Rank means nothing when the soul recognizes its counterpart." She covered her mouth, as if to keep her heart from escaping. "You speak as if love were simple." "It is not," he admitted, "but it is true." For a moment, only the wind outside answered them. Then she whispered, "I have lived unseen for so long, I do not know how to be looked upon." He took her hand again, pressing it gently to his chest. "Then let me look until you believe you exist." The simplicity of the words broke through her restraint. Her tears spilled freely, her body trembling not from cold but from release. "I do not know if I can trust this," she said, "but I want to." He smiled faintly. "Then that is enough." He drew her closer, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders. Outside, the storm began to ease, the snow thinning to soft flakes that drifted like feathers. "Come with me," he said. "Let the world see what it sought to hide." She hesitated. "And if it condemns me?" "Then it condemns us both," he replied without hesitation. "But I will not let you disappear again." Together they left the chapel, the Duke leading his horse through the softening snow, while Evelina clung to his arm for balance. The path back to Ashcroft was long, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was filled with unspoken understanding. Yet even as the estate's dark silhouette emerged through the mist, the Duke's jaw tightened. "They will not welcome you," he said quietly. "Beatrice will fight to keep her falsehoods intact." "Then let her," Evelina murmured. "Truth does not need permission to exist." He looked at her, pride and admiration deepening in his eyes. "You are stronger than you know." When they arrived, the household erupted into shock. Lady Beatrice descended the staircase, fury barely contained beneath her composure. "Your Grace," she said with forced civility, "I trust you found your way safely through this dreadful storm." "Indeed," he replied coldly, and I found what you tried to bury." Her smile faltered. "I beg your pardon?" "The letter you forged," he said. "The lies you whispered into every ear that would listen. You have mistaken cunning for power, my lady, but deceit built upon cruelty cannot stand." The color drained from her face. "You have no proof?" "No," he asked. "Then perhaps your own maid might speak differently. Was she not so easily bribed?" A tense silence filled the hall. The Duke turned to the servants who lingered nearby, their curiosity barely disguised. "You will all hear it plainly," he declared. "Lady Evelina is the rightful daughter of Lord Ashcroft. Her dignity, long stolen, is hereby restored, and if any among you dare question her honor, you shall answer to me." Murmurs rippled through the gathered staff, disbelief mingling with awe. Beatrice's composure shattered. "You cannot do this," she hissed. "I already have," he said simply. Evelina stood silent, her hands clasped tightly before her. The weight of years, of humiliation, of silence, seemed to lift from her shoulders. She looked at the Duke, her lips parting as though to speak, but he only shook his head gently. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let them see what courage looks like." Slowly, deliberately, she met her stepmother's gaze. "For 6 years, you told me I was nothing," she said softly. "But I have learned that worth cannot be stolen, only forgotten. And I remember now." Lady Beatrice turned away, defeated, her daughters shrinking behind her like pale reflections of her spite. The Duke offered Evelina his arm once more. "Come," he said. "There is warmth enough beyond this house." She hesitated, glancing around the grand hall that had once been her prison. Then, with quiet dignity, she placed her hand in his. Together they stepped out into the fading light, the storm having at last surrendered to calm. As they walked toward the waiting carriage, Evelina looked up at him and said softly, "You should not have come for me." He smiled faintly. "And yet, if I had not, the world would have remained dimmer for it." She looked toward the horizon, where the last glow of sunset bled through the clouds. "Then let the world see us as we are," she whispered. The Duke took her hand, his voice low but resolute. "It shall," he said, "for tonight the truth belongs to us.